right, and I believe we are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're on. Welcome back to the 38th episode of the Hagwon Startup Podcast, the podcast that addresses everything, excuse me a second here, everything and anything related to the discussion of anything and everything related to living and working in South Korea. I'm your host, Jack, and today on the 30th of September, I have the pleasure to welcome David Tizzard to our show. He's an assistant professor at Seoul Women's University, where he teaches Korean studies, including modern issues and Eastern and Western culture, and Hallyu, which I have no idea what it is, and I'm going to ask you about that in a second. He also teaches comparative politics at Hanyang University and has also taught gender and Korean society and Korean cinema. David is also a weekly columnist for the Korea Times and has published works throughout other media outlets, and his works have been also collectively, we just discovered, collected into certain places that he wasn't even aware of, but they're out there. So David is out there. Welcome, David.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on the show, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for agreeing to come on. So David and I literally, like usually I sit down with people a few minutes before the show starts and we have a short discussion, but I kind of chose not to talk about anything because I wanted to have like a blank slate so I could, ask you basic questions.
Mm-hmm. That's why I'm here, man. Ask me the questions and I'll see what I can do. Let's have a chat and find out where we go.
Yeah, sounds good. So like I'm looking at, your background and it's stacked with books, which is very different from my background. My books are, stacked in closets and all you see is these boxes. And the books that I have stacked in the closets are, probably very, very different from yours. So what kind of literature do you surround yourself with?
My books aren't organized very well, and that's just one shelf. I've got a couple more over here, but I grew up reading literature. One of my biggest loves was I read from a very early age, and of course, I wasn't reading political science or philosophy, things like that. I just loved reading, and I don't know, maybe it was sort of being, I didn't have any siblings until I was 8 years old. So a lot of time by myself with books, Roald Dahl from an early age and things like that. But I've always loved people like Borges, Nabokov, Salman Rushdie, Coetzee, that kind of literature. I'll just read anything and everything, but they have to be books generally. I have these Kindles and tablets and things like that, but I feel like I'm cheating. It doesn't feel right. I've got to have the books. So
yeah, it's a tactile experience. I agree. I have a similar thing. Like I use Kindle on my phone, which is I don't know. It just still feels like I'm using my phone. I've never used a actual Kindle device, but having a book in your hand, it's just I think it adds. Like I said, it's a tactile experience and it's a whole thing. When I was in Canada, I think one of my last jobs, the second last job before I left, was working at a bookstore. And one of the reasons why I wanted to work in a bookstore is because I love the feel of books and like just being around in the bookstore. I didn't get paid a lot, but I was just high every time I'd go into work because it was just so great to be around books, man.
Yeah, the smell of them, everything about them, and it's good to get away from screens once in a while because we're with screens all the time, and even like young children these days, my young kids, they're digital natives. They know how to use them. So just being away from the screens and having books in front of you, I think is a really good break for your eyes, for your consciousness, and also sets a good example to the children, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been reading to my kids since they were very, very little, and like right now they're in a habit of picking up. They do read comics mainly, but just the fact that they pick up the comics books on their own and they encourage their mom to go and buy them some, I think that's a good start. Hopefully that'll transition into books eventually, with time.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to start with just like the basics, very first, most common question, I guess. When did you come to Korea? Like, how long have you been in Korea right now, I guess?
I've been in Korea nearly 15 years. So I first came to Korea in November 2005. it was very cold. It was November. I was coming from the south of England, which is not the French Riviera, but it's not that cold there. So came nearly 15 years ago, November 2005, and the obviously, like most people will say, it was a different world to me, literally. It wasn't just a different country or things like that. I traveled and I was well versed in different cultures, but actually coming here and realizing that this might be a place that I have to try to get to know was both daunting and awe-inspiring. You know, it was great. So 15 years I've been here.
What made you come to Korea? Like what made you come here?
Wow, there's that. I did a degree in English and theatre. So I really enjoyed my time at university. You know, I was reading lots, I was writing lots. We were making films and really sort of exploring these creative outlets, which I thought was wonderful. Then I spent a year working at a music venue in Portsmouth called the Wedgwood Rooms. This was quite a famous venue in that bands that were warming up for the big festivals, such as Glastonbury or Reading, they would come in there. I'm seeing sort of Frank Black from the Pixies, and they would all come in there. And I worked there for a year, and I realized I could probably keep working there, or I could go and try and do something else. And I decided just to roll the dice and see what happens and go somewhere else and do something else. And I wasn't satisfied with just that, let's say. I wanted to see more and be more.
Right. So, I don't know, for me personally, like, I guess the main goal was similar to yours, just, traveling, experiencing the world, but
Mm.
I was really posed to maintain my expat existence through teaching English, and I wasn't really sure for how long and what I would
Mhm.
do. Like, did you have any specific goals when you were leaving, or was it kind of similar for you?
I was just, in a real hippie kind of way, I was going out to find myself and see what I would become. It wasn't even so much a career at the
Okay.
time, although I've always loved English, and people said that you'd be very good at that particular thing.
Hmm.
But it was more of a personal journey at the time, you know? It wasn't so much career, although it's since gone into that, which goes to show you never know where life will take you. I certainly didn't expect to be here doing what I am in 2019.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think for the most part, I don't know, at least during my time, most people that I've known, because it seems like you and I came here around the same time, 2005 for me. So I guess we'd have been just a year or two before me, right?
I was 2005 as well, so
Oh,
we're the same.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So um, it seemed like a lot of people were moving here for the purpose of work, but for you, that wasn't the case, right?
There's always work. I've worked since I thought about this the other day. I've worked since I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
We grew up, I grew up in a quite well-off family. We were comfortable. But my parents always insisted that I go out and work and learn the value of what it means to graft. So I had paper rounds at 14. I was working in the Dover docks, in the ports at 16, 17, and I've done everything. But I've always worked, and so I never felt that career or job would be a problem. There's always some work to do, no matter what it is, and I don't really look down on certain jobs or anything like that. Maybe that's growing up reading Orwell and things. That yeah, work is work. You've all got to do it somehow.
Right. Paper routes, eh? I did those too. That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. They're good in the summer, not so good in the winter.
Yeah, I did mine in the winter, and this is like we're talking about -30 and knee-deep snow in Winnipeg, Canada.
Hmm.
Fun
Yeah.
stuff. Have you been back home during your time here in Korea?
Yeah, absolutely. We tend to, with a young family now, it's hard because plane tickets are expensive.
Right.
But we try to go back every year. When that's not possible, my family come over here. So it's every year or every other year, and then in those alternating years, the family will come over here. So in regular contact, and of course with things like Kakao Talk and Skype and video calls, it's not like 2005 or something. It's a lot easier these days. So go back kind of regularly and touch base. Yeah, it's important too, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. That's very important. You brought up the prices, and that's for anybody who's out there and like is having doubts whether they should go back home now because it's too expensive. Go now because once you get married and have kids, then it really becomes expensive. that,
Yeah.
that was my case. Like when I met my wife, I thought to myself, let's go to Thailand because we've never been there. Let's go here and explore the world. And going back to Canada is going to be expensive. And then the kids came, and then it literally really became expensive. So like right now, me and it's 4 people. Me and 2 kids. They're all not grown up, but they're old enough to have to pay like 70 or 80% of the ticket fares.
Yep.
Which means we're looking at anywhere from between $5,000 to $6,000 just for the tickets alone, right? So.
They're not holidays anymore, are they?
No, no.
2 kids like that, but it wouldn't be the same without them. But I completely understand where you're coming from.
So both of us have been here for a long time, but I guess you've spent most of your time a little bit further up north on the peninsula, right? Like you live closer to the capital, is that right?
Yeah, I live and work in Seoul.
Okay. So have you always lived and worked in Seoul?
Yeah, my first job was right in the middle of Gwanghwamun, right by the statue of Isun Shin, and on that big sort of 4-way section where all the protests and all the celebrations, all those are. I worked on the 8th floor of a big building there. So when I came and I arrived, I was in a hotel on Jongno Samga. And working in Gwanghwamun and walking that path every day. So, yeah, I've been right in the heart of Seoul ever since. Our family does have a house out in Gangwon-do, a place called Wonpong, and that's actually above the 38th parallel. So the 38th parallel was the original demarcation line that was drawn up by the American soldiers, Bone, Steel, and Rust, for the southern American sphere of influence and the northern, originally Russian sphere of influence. After the Korean War, that line got moved. So family has a place above the 38th parallel in Wonton, but still in South Korea. It's pretty close to the border, but the air there is lovely, and it's really nice just to get out of Seoul sometimes, because it's a wonderful city, but it's a city. And I need the countryside sometimes.
Yeah, that's the same for us. We live here in Ulsan, and it's the pollution gets to me. Today I was checking it. In the morning it was great, fine. But then, like yesterday, there was an explosion. An oil tanker blew up for some strange reason.
Yes.
Yeah, so yesterday when I was kind of planning on a little outdoor trip with my kids, my wife immediately let me know that some of the moms locally here are kind of refusing to go out for fear of, pollution. I checked the air quality meters and they seemed fine, but today in the afternoon it started to go south or north, whichever way, but it didn't look very nice, man. So I don't know, do you use like one of those air quality controllers on an app or something?
No, obviously in the house we have dehumidifiers. I'm quite lucky I'm in the northeast of Seoul, and I'm currently in a little cottage surrounded by trees and things like that. So in the center of Seoul, the air feels much worse when you're surrounded by the cars, the buildings. I'm sort of out on the outskirts, but also away from apartments, and I've not really noticed the air being as bad out here.
Right.
I know it's very serious, and I know these apps will tell you don't go outside and don't do things like this. South Korea, or the Korean Peninsula, is in a very interesting place because it's on, in terms of where it's located geographically, it's similar to the Mediterranean. So the hot summers here are completely natural, because that's what you would expect in sort of places like Greece or Italy. You expect it to be sweltering hot. But it's just the winters here which are particularly cold, and that's because the wind shoots down sort of from Mongolia, and it comes down this channel down into the Korean Peninsula. That does bring a lot of dust. That does bring a lot of this misemonji and the micro dust, the fine dust, the particle dust, all these ones that come down. So
Yeah, and living in a
a
busy
lot,
city doesn't help the cause, right?
right, a lot of people move away from it. I mean, there's the young Swedish girl Greta that's campaigning for more climate awareness, which is very important, and there needs to be more of that. But I would say that there needs to be more push on that towards nations that, have a big responsibility to that. What nations like China, nations like India, it's all very well and good looking at sort of advanced nations, but that criticism needs to be spread across the board, I think.
Hmm. So, so before, yeah, okay, since we're on that topic already, I guess you do a lot of research because that's kind of part of your research, right? In the area of Korea, is it just North, South Korean relationships overall, or how?
Everything.
Yeah.
Ideally, you can never it's like a video game. You might complete a video game, you might have a whole band's discography, and you might read all the works by Shakespeare, for
Hmm.
example, but you can never really complete Korea.
Sure.
I'm not saying that I'm trying to, but I've never been one of these people that will just go very deep down into one particular subject and be satisfied with that. So it's not just the North, it's not just the South, it's everything, but it's the people, it's the culture, it's the psychology, the sociology, and everything that goes on. And I try to understand it. I don't try to be prescriptive and say how it should be,
Hmm.
or say how I would prefer it to be. I generally just try to observe it, and from that, think out loud in terms of questions. And yeah, that's what I do. So it's North and South, and the people, most importantly, I think.
Right. So, being in Korea for as long as you have, and living in the capital, I know I personally have noticed a lot of changes here in Ulsan, which is the industrial or industrial hub of South Korea, and it gets like Ulsan City gets a lot of kickbacks or not kickbacks, but a lot of um, money fed from the companies that are here, right? Like one of the biggest parks that's built here just nearby across from our school has been basically paid for by SK, and it was a huge chunk of money. And I know that SK and S Oil have both paid for, you know, structures here and there. And so the city itself, the city of Ulsan, has undergone dramatic changes since 2005, or even just since 2010. I left in
Mhm.
2008 and came back 2010, and within those 2 years, like neighborhoods that were non-existent virtually just kind of sprung out within 2 years. And then since 2010, like 9 years, the city has changed drastically. So, um, what are some of the changes that you've noticed while living in Seoul, I guess, and how have they affected you, if they have in any way?
Some of the changes are certainly the sign. I mean, there's lots to this, and gentrification is one. But before I touch on gentrification, I think one of the most telling changes that I've noticed is that in 2005, walking along Jongno, one of the main thoroughfares in Seoul, it was possible to buy 3 pirated DVDs for 10,000 won.
Really?
They're Yeah, they're on the street.
Wow.
And policemen would walk by, and you could buy fake watches, ties, things like this on the street. Also, when driving on the roads, you would see people standing in the middle of traffic selling sort of rice snacks and crackers and things like this, walking in between the lanes of cars. And I, you don't see that anymore.
Hmm.
Of course, there are still pirate DVDs, and I know technology has changed and now it's all downloading and YouTube. But in general, those things that were once kind of flagrantly illegal, they've moved out of sight. And the
Yeah.
people working on those kind of very dangerous jobs to stand on expressways and things like that, selling them, just try to make a living, which everybody needs to do. You don't see that anymore. And so that's both a good thing and a bad thing. You know, in terms of adhering to international laws, to global norms, and trying to protect copyright, things like that, that's a very good thing. Stops people doing dangerous jobs. But the flip side of that is you see less. You see bigger chains, you see bigger franchises. In 2005, everyone was going to Outback Steakhouse if you're a foreigner, because that was where you could get some meat and a kind of Western meal. That's completely changed now. The selection and the choices are amazing and fantastic. The gentrification of all the areas, you see it around sort of Haebancheon, Gyeongnidan, Itaewon. They happen at such breakneck speed. The trouble is, however, they happen so quickly that they're very short-lived, and then they sort of push up rent, the prices change, and then the area empties out again. So visually there has been a change. The apartments, the rows of apartment buildings still look disgustingly communist. It's very interesting.
That was one of the first things that I noticed about South Korea coming here. I think I came here in 2004 for a visa run. I was back in Japan, and yeah, like you said, one of the things that stood out, I found that the buildings look, like you said, very communist-like. Just their structure and kind of positioning, very concrete slabs in the middle of, a beautiful, otherwise beautiful landscape.
But it's a sign of affluence here, isn't it? Because where I'm from, and this again is said with no disrespect, but those kind of buildings would be a sign of maybe the less economically privileged, and they might be housing provided by the council, things like that. Everybody would aspire to a house, a detached house or a semi-detached house with no neighbors. But over here, it's a sign of affluence. I mean, if you can have a ninth floor apartment overlooking the Han River or something like that, and they look, I won't say they look disgusting, but they don't look pleasant from the outside. But inside, it's a whole different world, isn't it? So it's really that, but it's box living.
Yeah.
They're still.
Yeah, of course it is. But I mean, the looks of apartments has changed drastically since 2005. Like some of the first apartments that I saw were basically, like I said, these gray-looking apartment blocks with massive numbers, painted on the side of them. And so it was like 101, 102, 103, and I thought to myself, that is very strange. Like you said, it would be something the government would have provided for underprivileged families or something. It was very strange. These days, apartments, I think, look a lot more aesthetically pleasing to the eye. They're prettier. They're not as kind of gaudy, strange looking. I don't know what the insides are. Usually, the apartments on the inside are very nice, but on the outside, the aesthetics have changed drastically, I would say. So.
I agree that the facades are definitely better. I think more in terms of the skyline or driving across the city. It's not as visually striking, say, as somewhere like Shanghai, Hong Kong. They all have their apartments, but yeah, I think that's something maybe that has remained. Seoul is still working on that.
Right. So, please tell us, what do you presently do? I just mentioned that you work at, Hanyang University, Women's University. You work at two. How does that work exactly, working at two universities?
It means I keep very busy.
Right.
So I've worked at Seoul Women's University since 2007. I've been employed there as an assistant professor since, I think, 2013. And it's a fabulous university. It's based out in the northeast of Seoul. It's a wonderful, calm campus. It's very close to the Ulsan Military Academy. But there, currently, as you said, you didn't know what Hallyu is, so I've been teaching the Korean wave, and I've been teaching modern issues in Korea. On that, we cover with the students feminism, abortion, Korea-Japan relations, although that might be off the syllabus this semester. I'm not sure yet. Right. South and North relations, gentrification, tattoos, subcultures and drugs, things like that. And I also teach East and West culture here. So trying to look at the philosophical underpinnings of each society and how they are built up from Platonic and Confucian origins, whether that's still applicable today, and how they deal with things like democracy, how they deal with things like international relations, international law, whether the East and West are the same, whether they're different, whether they can be the same, should be the same. That's a real sort of existential question for a lot of South Koreans, because this is a country, I believe, still trying to work out who and what it is. One of the reasons I'm still here is that the South Korean story, and that's different from the Korean story, but the South Korean story isn't finished. It's still being written. And I mean that in a slightly cynical way, in that history is being changed. And there's a fantastic Russian proverb that says the past is unpredictable. And that seems to apply to South Korea sometimes, because the heroes of the past are becoming the villains, and some of the villains of the past are becoming the heroes. The enemies are becoming the friends, and the friends are becoming the enemies, etc. So the South Korean story is still being told. And when the students, the undergrads that I teach, when they have to face those, it's fascinating, because they feel like they are contributing or writing their own South Korea. And that doesn't mean that they can just write anything and anything would be acceptable. But I love the fact that the story is still sort of being told, being uncovered, and being lived here. That's Seoul Women's University. At Hanyang, I teach comparative politics, and that's fascinating. The amount of students that have spent 10 years in India, 15 years in Peru, things like this, the international experience of South Korean students compared to 2005, the international experience of the students that I have, the undergrads these days, it's night and day. And that does wonders, not only for their sort of the breadth of their perspectives on things, but also the classroom atmosphere in determining what is acceptable discourse.
You mean a lot more younger generation of Koreans travel abroad these days? That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, not just that they travel abroad, but they've had extensive time spent abroad. Maybe it's with parents, maybe it's families overseas, and they're sent to their aunt and uncle's house for 10 years, 5 years. But in 2005, 6, 7, that would be the exception.
Right.
To a group of 30, 40 undergrads, and now it's the norm.
Yeah.
So that's changing. It wasn't until I get my dates wrong here, but South Koreans were sort of banned from traveling abroad until 1987, something like that. That's why everybody went to Jeju for their honeymoon. You had to have a specific visa to travel abroad. You know, it wasn't encouraged that people traveled freely.
Right.
You had to have permission to do that if you were working on business. Of course, you could go, but for the regular citizen, international travel wasn't a thing for South Korea. It's only been a thing for a couple of decades, 2.5 decades. And of course, for the North Koreans, it's still not a thing. And when the South Koreans do travel abroad now, say if they were to go to your country, Canada, they would still be under the jurisdiction of Korean law. They're still bound by the laws of Korea while they're in Canada.
Right.
So, for example, if they watched a couple of episodes of the Trailer Park Boys and, you know, wanted to try some edibles or something like this that might be perfectly legal in other countries, they're still not allowed to do that. They take their Koreanness with them. So the leash on South Korean people has been and still is in some ways quite tight, but slowly, hopefully, that's relaxing and they're given more freedom and not restrained to the country as much.
Yeah. For the international travel, it's true. Even in our small language school here, we've got a group of kind of higher level students, and most of them have. Actually, there was a couple of students who were born in the States and have lived there for prolonged periods of time. I guess until maybe last year they came back to Korea. There was a couple of kids who either lived in the Czech Republic and studied at an international school. We just had a girl who just came back from Poland, who was studying in an international school, speaks fluent English. Saw a couple of girls lived in Jordan. So yeah.
I mean, that's normal now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not high-end Seoul universities, but that seems to be becoming more and more normal across Korea, and that's a good thing, I think.
Right. Sorry, what is Hallyu again? You kind of briefly touched on it. I missed it somehow. What's Hallyu?
Hallyu is the Korean wave. It was a term coined originally by the Chinese, I believe, but it composes, originally it was dramas and music. And so it's a form of soft power. So if we think that North Korea tries to influence international relations, North Korea tries to influence American behavior, Russia and Chinese behavior through its use of military threats, through its use of its now nuclear arsenal, its missile tests, its ballistic launches. That's how North Korea tries to influence the international system through its brinkmanship. South Korea decided that it would use soft power. So it would try to influence people through the use of its dramas. It would make domestic dramas and it would make domestic K-pop, not always in a top-down fashion like that. A lot of it would be organically made, of course. But then this would promote the image, the reputation, and the nation of South Korea abroad. It would not only bring money, because people would then be buying these products, but it would also bring legitimacy, because you have to remember that neither Koreas recognize each other as a sovereign nation. They don't have diplomatic relations with each other, and they both claim jurisdiction over the other side of the demarcation line. So it's about testing with the world who is, when you hear the word Korea, what is the first thing that you think of? For the longest time, the answer has been North Korea. And it still might be Kim Jong-un. If you took the global population and asked them, Korea, who is number one, what's the first thing you think of? It still might be Kim Jong-un, but BTS are really challenging that now. And that's a good thing, because you'd rather be known for a group that makes, some catchy pop hits than a leader like Kim Jong-un.
A leader, sure.
Right. So Hallyu is the imagine Hollywood, imagine Bollywood, imagine sort of the Canadian comedy or film industry, that being promoted abroad to increase the reputation of the country. That's Hallyu in a very basic expression.
All right. So do you teach all that in English?
Yeah, I do. A lot of the time I might try to explain things in Korean. A lot of the sources sometimes are in Korean that we use, but at both Seoul Women's University and at Hanyang, there are international students. So if their Korean is not perfect or very good, then we hit a barrier. My Korean's not perfect, but in terms of what I'm teaching, I'm normally quite comfortable. So most of it's in English, but with occasional Korean sources and materials to go through.
Right. So from what you're saying, as I understand that you get a large part of your students are international students. They're not necessarily all Korean students, right?
At Hanyang, there's quite a large majority. In Seoul Women's University, they're the minority. It's mainly Korean students, but because there are international students there, that necessitates using English.
So a lot of the topics that you do cover are Korea related. I'm just wondering if your authority as a professor or as an authority figure in that particular field, if you're ever being challenged by your students, if they ever kind of think, why is Westerner teaching topics related to Korea and the Korean Peninsula?
Absolutely, and I encourage them to challenge me. So I've long adopted the Socratic dialect in my classes, where it's an engagement. It's not a top-down lecture. Of course, I lecture them, and of course, I present information to them. But it's really important to me that the students find their own answers to these questions, and that the students go on their own explorations. I don't expect them to agree with me, and I find the greatest value eventually in the students that do disagree, because perhaps when you were at university, disagreeing with your professor in a seminar was quite normal. And, of course, you don't just do it in an antagonistic way, but there is meant to be discourse and there is meant to be discussion, and that is absolutely meant to happen. It's really important for me that my students, once I've lectured them for, let's say, 15 weeks on a subject, that they walk out of that subject and they don't know what my opinions are. Of course, they can ask me, but I'll have given them such a broad range of views on how you could approach a topic, whether it's economic, whether it's Marxist, whether it's sociological, whether it's gender-based, whether it's ethnocentric or something like that. I'll show them all these perspectives, and I'll ask them to evaluate them and find out what they think is the correct way to look at these things, rather than just knowing that this is my perspective. So I've never really had that problem with students questioning my approach. Some people in the social media question my approach. If I write on feminism, abortion, things like that, a lot of people question, how can a white man write on these things? And that's a fair observation, but I don't believe that they actually ever read my articles. They just see the white face, which is unfortunate that the paper puts the face there. But I think they just see the white face in a headline and then immediately react to that without actually looking what I'm saying, or realizing that my perspectives come from interacting with hundreds of South Korean females and talking to them every day about these things. So it's not things that just come out of my head.
Right. So right now you're a weekly columnist for the Korea Times, and you've done a lot of work. I remember, I think in your bio you sent in, you did some a lot of reviews for the Olympics, 2018 Olympics. You reviewed a lot of the papers that were being published, if not all of them, right? I think.
Yeah, for the Pyeongchang 2018 Olympics, I was fortunate enough to work down there in an official position in the translation office. So rather than doing the translation, there was a great team of Koreans, and they would translate it, and then it was down to me and a Canadian gentleman named Andrew, and we would proofread all the English documents that would go out in the official capacity. So I think it was after being there for 3 or 4 days, I was given President Moon's address to the Olympic Committee, and was told that I had to proofread that and rewrite it and get it out in a day or two. So I realized the gravity of the task in front of me very quickly. But it was great to be down there, because rather than see it from afar, I was able to witness the Olympics unfolding by being there and working. And I thought it was fantastic what South Korea did to make that all happen, because the area around there is not a mecca of winter sports or things like that. I grew up in south of England, but we went to Europe skiing, we went to Italy and Switzerland and things like that. So if you're from Canada, you will know that mountains and skiing and winter sports is a big thing.
Sure.
Down there, it wasn't that, but they did really well to put on that Olympics. And so I was very fortunate to work down there, and loved every minute of it.
How did you get started in writing working for places like that? Like, you publish things in the Korea Times. I've noticed some what is it, North Korea news? Like, how did you get involved with writing articles for these outlets?
So with the Korea Times, I would read the Korea Times and I would read the Korea Herald. I would read the newspapers here in English and Korean to find out what was going on. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming to a stage where they'd just got in a new batch of columnists, and I was reading the work being published every week in the Korea Times, and I just thought to myself, this is rubbish. What is this here? It's not well written. The arguments are very reductionist. There's, very little breadth of knowledge going on. And so I wrote to the editor and I said, what you've got in your paper isn't very good. And he challenged me to write something better. And so I did. And that's how it went. And I'm very thankful to Mr. O at the Korea Times and people that work with him, because even though that we might disagree on some political issues or social issues, things like that, he's given me the freedom to write whatever I want, and he supported me. And they have never monitored my work. They've never edited my work. They've never censored my work. And even though I'm writing on these very hot button issues every week, they've given me complete freedom and trust. And so I'm very thankful for the Korea Times for doing that. And that was because I wrote to them and asked to do that. It was the same with NK News. I believe. I wrote to NK News. That was one of the first ones I did, and said, hey, I want to write for you. And that was during the Park Geun-hye administration. And what I noticed about my writing is that during the Park Geun-hye administration, to talk of communication, interaction with the North, to talk of friendly relations, that was not very well received at the time. They were the enemy at that time. But that's what I did. I went into North Korean news, and my task there, they actually gave me that task, was to write pro-engagement pieces. David, can you write this? Can you be the contrary voice to what everything else is going on? And so I said, yeah, I can be a contrarian. I'm very good at that. And during the Moon Jae-in administration, now President Moon, he's obviously looking at that peace thing, and I'm a big fan of peace. But what I find myself doing now is also being contrarian and saying, hey, shouldn't we be thinking about this vis-a-vis the North? Shouldn't we be thinking about doing this? So I've always kind of been the voice against the public opinion in terms of North Korea. But how I get started and writing in these things is from, and this is what I tell my students all the time, especially the undergrads, they're looking for jobs. Youth unemployment is not particularly rosy at the moment. I read it was at a 19-year low, 19-year high, youth unemployment. Is I tell them now with emails, you don't have to go out and network. You know, you used to have to go out with your business cards in your pocket, go to these meetings, smile, shake hands, not get too drunk, carry a good reputation, and you might get invited to do some things if they remember who you are. And that still works to a certain degree. But these days with emails, you write an email and you can get people's addresses, you send them emails and you say, I think I can do this and I want to do this. And obviously you'll get rejected sometimes, but once in a while, somebody will show trust and somebody will give you that opportunity, and then you just have to be ready and willing to take it.
Right. Ever heard of Neil Armstrong?
Absolutely.
Not the astronaut.
Okay. The other Neil Armstrong. Help me.
Another Neil Armstrong fella, friend of mine, writing for the Korea Times as well. He doesn't write on a regular basis. He's not a stable columnist, but he had some articles published. He's one of your countrymen.
Okay.
So, figured.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yes. Now, sorry, Neil.
All right.
I'm lucky. I don't have to go to the offices or anything like that. They invite me to events and things like that. But I get to work for the Korea Times from the comfort of my own home, and
Right.
I'm very grateful for that. Yeah.
So, what are some things that you write about? Like, what are some of the topics and articles that you've published? You mentioned that,
yeah.
Sorry, before we started, there was a dislike on the video even prior to start, and I was we were laughing at it, trying to figure out who the haters were pointing their thumbs down at. It's gone now, but you mentioned that some of the topics that you write about are quite provocative, and I would assume that they would be.
Yeah.
So what are some of the topics that you see would be, I guess, most controversial or most provocative to people, and cause a stir in the public?
It's different. Different topics cause different responses. So when I've written on LGBTQ issues like that in South Korea, asking who flies the gay flag, and say, for example, at gay parades, we have the British Embassy down there, the Canadian Embassy, the American Embassy attend these events, but the current South Korean administration doesn't attend these events, and they've sort of said no to gay marriage. And of course, that's their right to, but I do address these issues, and not necessarily with my opinion, but ask the questions. And that obviously gets some pushback from conservative members of society, and they take the time to come and tell me that I'm wrong about what I say. And I try to remind them that it's the South Koreans who should be right or wrong. It's not my decision for that to make. Some very other controversial ones. A friend of mine, Becky White, she's a model, and she has a new show out on TBS radio on Sunday mornings called Sunday Studio, if I believe that's right. from 9 o'clock. She has a project called the Halfie Project, and Becky is half Korean, half American, and so she decided to create a project called the Halfie Project, and she went around interviewing all these people that were half Korean and half something else, and talked to them about their lives. And it's really fascinating because the people are so diverse, whether they're half German, half Polish, and all these different things. And I really supported that and learned a lot from it, because I have 2 children that will, grow up with similar experiences, perhaps. And so when I wrote a column about that called "Are You a Halfie?", which was the name of her project, I got a lot of people telling me I wasn't allowed to say that word. That was still controversial, but of course it wasn't my word. It was Becky's word. My work on K-pop has got a lot of negative feedback from the BTS army. I famously wrote an article called "K-pop Sucks," and in that I made sure it was very clear that I realized music is subjective. And the first concert I ever went to was Vanilla Ice in Melbourne in the MCG. I used to have MC Hammer on cassette and all this stuff. I know music is subjective.
Sure.
But I criticized the industry, the South Korean music industry, how it creates this kind of slave contract mentality, forces people into very uncreative situations. And of course, I got a lot of positive feedback from that. People would come up to me at meetings and go, "Excuse me, are you the K-pop sucks guy?" And I never knew whether to say yes or no when they asked me. But a lot of extreme K-pop fans came after me for that. I wrote a follow-up called K-pop Sucks Part 2. K-pop Sucks Part 3 is coming. So that the K-pop people come at me, the Christian or the conservative, the social conservative people come at me. The people focused on controlling language and what people are allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say, especially based on my identity of being a white man, they come after me in terms of those things. So I would at any other time have given up, but I receive emails from people and messages. I received one the other day saying that my article made her cry and it was touching. And I don't say this to blow my own trumpet, but people go out of their way to contact me. And I realized that, okay, then my writing is working. I don't expect to please everyone, and I know what I'm doing. But when I see how many people write to me, and I get quite a lot, I think that, no, I am doing the right thing, and I need to learn that maybe the positive feedback I get isn't always that positive, and the negative feedback I get, maybe there is some validity to it, and I should learn from them both. But, sometimes, Jack, I don't write to tell other people what to think. I write to realize or work out what I think about things. It's kind of a selfish project sometimes that, you ask yourself, well, how do you really feel about the issue of abortion? How do you feel about this new movie? Is it 82년생 Kim Ji-young, this new movie that was from a feminist book? That was the last thing I wrote about. How do I really feel about those things? And what would I be comfortable saying in public about those things? Because it's very easy to say things anonymously on an internet board. It's very easy to say things to your mates down the pub. But what would you say about that in public, that you would be able to sleep at night, knowing that you're not lying to yourself just for attention or likes, and you're not doing something that's not you? So I write these things as a learning exercise to work out what I think about them. It's very rewarding.
Yeah, well, I think any type of writing, whatever it is, if it's just for yourself or any creative form of expression or form of creative expression, is kind of a a catharsis for the creator themselves. So like if you do write, I think a lot of people, when they write, it takes them some time to step back and reread the material they wrote to kind of understand what their thoughts or what their thought process was while they were writing it. I'm sure like you edit your work yourself or have other people edit it, but I'm pretty sure that you must read it at least 2 or 3 times before you get it published anyway, right? So it kind of helps you to think twice about what you wrote and help you kind of put your
Yeah.
thoughts together, right?
I always sleep on it once. I used to take a week to write an article piece, but now because I have to write an opinion piece a week, I can't take a week. I write it one night and I'll generally sleep on it and send it in the morning. And if I wake up and I'm still happy with it, I send it. I don't have any editors. Nobody edits my work. It goes as I give it to them. That's the way we do it. And so my friends will often message me and say, David, you spelt something wrong there, or it's that, you got that wrong. And that works like that. Just what you said, something very true, Jack, that writing is a cathartic experience and it helps that. And so even when I get the negative responses and things like that, I realize that's also a cathartic experience for those people.
Yeah.
And so I'm helping people understand what they think as well. So that using the discourse and starting the conversation, I'm more than happy to do that. It's something that I feel needs to be done.
Right. Yeah. I've had a similar experience in my YouTube channel and my videos. It's not like I don't have anything published in written form. I wrote the last big thing I wrote was my dissertation, my MA dissertation, which was on the Palestinian and Israeli conflict and how it's talked about in the mainstream media. And I got some feedback on it. I don't remember exactly what it was, but just more recently, like I make videos now, and there was some issues that were going on the different social platforms, and people were kind of responding to a response video that I posted, and it wasn't all pleasant, but one particular person messaged me and basically said, thank you for saying what I needed to hear, because it really helped. So I was like, okay, cool. One person saved, so to speak, Can't always help everybody, but or make everybody happy, but if there's one
Right.
person. I keep in mind, I remember when I was teaching in Reading, Reading on Thames, I think is that right?
Yeah.
I did a 6-week camp there, and the head teacher was an Israeli teacher who's been teaching for about 25 years, and he always told me that the schools in Israel are tough, students are tough, that it's probably one of the worst education, or one of the worst things to have as a job, to be a teacher in Israeli schools, because the students they're just, for whatever reason, they're hard to deal with. And I can imagine, because I've taught in the public system in England, and the kids were merciless. In Northampton, not all schools, but Northampton is kind of a working class area, and so the kids can be pretty rough. Anyway, one thing the head teacher told me was, pay attention to that one student. If there's one student that you can save out of a class full of 30 kids that couldn't care less whether you're there or not, then teach that one student and make sure that they understand you. And I guess maybe a lot of your work, it could be probably classified as that. There will always be people who will tell you to stop, or you're wrong and this and that, but
There's a fabulous story by Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentinian short story writer, called The Circular Ruins. And it was actually what Christopher Nolan, I believe, he said he read that and then he made, let me get my films correct, Inception. Inception is a dream film, right? He read that Borges short story and he wrote Inception. But that short story by Borges, The Circular Ruins, it deals with a unnamed protagonist trying to teach a body of students, trying to find the one that will elevate themselves to the position of a human being. And it's fascinating to read. You might enjoy that, Jack. Perhaps if you haven't read it, have a look for it. It's online and it take you 5 minutes to read.
Sure. What's the book title?
The Circular Ruins. It's a short story, so it takes about 5 minutes to read, by Borges. Jorge Luis Borges. I'll put a comment on the bottom of the video, and I'll put a link there. You can.
Yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely, that'd be fantastic. So, since you do write articles in the NK publications, like just out of the blue, what are your thoughts? So, President Moon mentioned that, I don't know, his candidacy or whoever is aiming, I guess Korea's aiming or looking towards the reunification of the peninsula by 2040 or something like that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, do you think that's going to happen? How would it happen? Would it be possible? I don't know.
I want it to happen. I want there to be peace for the Korean people. I want there to be peace on the Korean peninsula, and I want there to be peace more globally. I think broadly around the world, we're experiencing a time of peace relative to what has gone before. We don't necessarily, and this is with no disrespect to where there is conflict around the world, and there is conflict, but we don't have conscription in Europe to fight totalitarian regimes like we had in sort of the Second World War, the First World War. We don't have a Korean War. We don't have a Vietnam War, or even to a similar extent an Iraq or an Afghanistan as much anymore. So we're in times of relative peace, and I long hope that continues. In terms of South and North, there are so many ways that you could look at this. One of the most fundamental questions, I believe, is who's going to rule? I mean, one country has one leader. That's the way it works. You can look at the definition of a state. It has a territory. It has a permanent population. And it has a state centralized bureaucracy. That's what a state is. And, you know, a police force, other things, and it has to be recognized by other states as well. But a state essentially has one leader. And now, who is that going to be? Because that's the question that trips up all my students. They'll tell me when we discuss Nambuk Gwanggae or South-North Korean relations, they're like, yeah, we want it, and we want it. And economic conditions aside, but I said, well, who's going to lead? And then they get stuck because they immediately assume that it will be the South Korean president. They've also got to remember that most of these students hate the last two South Korean presidents. President Park is, you know, very unpopular among some of the population. President Moon is unpopular among some. Whether you go back to Im Yong-bak, Roh Moo-hyun, Kim Dae-jung, they've all had huge amounts of detractors. And so they assume the South Korean president is going to rule, regardless of their popularity here. But then they're assuming that the Kim regime in the North will give up power after they've had that since 1948. I mean, they're just going to give that away. Kim Jong-un is going to make a sacrifice and say, okay, fair enough. Like, we'll go and live in Hawaii and you have the peninsula and that will be that. I don't see it happening.
Yeah.
The Kim regime is playing the long game. There was talks that Kim Il-sung wanted to do it, but Kim Jong-il didn't. And then, you know, whatever happened there, Kim Il-sung was meant to be coming. He was meant to be meeting people. Then Kim Jong-il came in. We've had summits since 2000. I mean, the first Inter-Korean summit, Roh Moo-hyun did it in 2007. To me, the summits are good, but they're not an indication of anything because we had one in 2000.
Yeah.
With the Korean Olympic team in Pyeongchang, there was one of those in the 2000 Sydney Olympics. They did that then as well. And so to look at that 2018 combined team and say that's the start of something, I want it to be, by the way, but I don't see it. And until they work out who's going to rule the peninsula, because the two nations, they disagree on history.
Yeah.
They don't have the same history about how the war started and what happened during the Japanese colonization. They have different disagreements on that. Worryingly, the one thing that they do have in common, to a certain extent, is belief in sort of an ethno-nationalism, which is the Minjok, which was sort of originally created by Shin Chae-ho, trying to tell the story of the Korean people as a unique race. And so in the meetings between President Moon and Chairman Kim, I read a report that said Minjok was the most commonly used word. So the one thing that's trying to bring them together is race.
Right.
In 2019, in I forget what the things are in North America, like Forever 20. It's not Forever 21. The programs where they check your genetic history, 23andMe or something like this, right? They can check and they'll tell you you're 10% French and 14% Scottish.
Yeah, I've heard of those. I have no idea what names they go by, but yeah.
Yeah. Forever 21 is fast fashion that's just shut down. 23andMe, something like that. They're not very popular here. They still go on this idea of one homogenized race, and there is homogeneity, absolutely, but it's not as it's perceived. So they need to solve the leader problem. And Korea has its own problems with leaders. North Korea is more secure in that sense. So I don't see unification happening anytime soon while the Kim regime has power in North Korea, and they do have power. And for example, I'm from Britain, and the DPRK is a member of the United Nations since 1991, and Britain recognizes North Korea as a legitimate sovereign state. We have an ambassador in Pyongyang, Ambassador Colin Crooks, works there. We've had one there since 2001, and so I can't really willingly sit here and wish for the end of a sovereign nation that my country recognizes with all its legal protections. And so at the moment, I would suggest it's coming to terms with two independent Koreas. And hopefully one of them's denuclearized, but if it's nuclearized, as it is in practice, then we need to make sure it abides by its international law.
Yeah, I think the peninsula would have to switch to a republic and have kind of a centralized union, possibly like the European Union or the African Union. But there's Kyo Khan who's posting a couple of messages. I just wanted to read those and see if you had anything to add to. There's pieces against the state of nature, unfortunately. Wild animals know peace in death. That's the order of the universe. It is going to be the man, so this was in response to who's going to be the leader. It is going to be the man who is willing to be merciless and kill or remove any that go against him. And then the last one is in relation to race. Race is real. Unfortunately, white people are the only ones that have forgotten this. Every other race is mankind knows that race is real. Hello guys, he says, I am enjoying the conversation. A lot of morbid comments, but any...
Let me just touch on the one, that kind of Hobbesian Leviathan that the real world is brutish and nasty and short, and we live in this realist world. That's an idea. I mean, that's basic reductionism. That's what it is. I'm not saying it's not true at times, but Mark Peterson, the Korean historian, he does wonderful work on the peaceful transitions of power between the Shilla dynasty, the Joseon dynasty, the previous dynasties of Korea. And what he says is you notice that they overlap sometimes, these dynasties, and that's because they sort of coexisted peacefully. It wasn't one tearing down the other and sort of murdering all on the soil and things like that. Moreover, just as there are realist theories, there are liberal theories, and there are constructivist theories, Gusongjuyi, there are Taoist theories, and so just to only see one and say that is the way of the world and that is the way it is, it seems to be a little bit reductionist to me. You might suggest that it's true 70% of the time, 80% of the time, but then when is it not true, and what affects those things, and how can we minimize that or maximize this? So I'm always very wary of people that speak in 100% absolutes like that, because there's always an exception to the rule.
Right. Yeah, precisely. How about your response to maybe race is real? Unfortunately, white people are the only ones who have forgotten this. Every other race of mankind knows that race is real.
This ties a lot into identity politics, which is going on now, and there is a sort of a standpoint position where we can never understand people that have experienced or gone through the experiences of another race or of another ethnicity. I'm not going to sit here and say what the last word on whether race is real or is not real. A very popular book, kind of recently, not that recently, by Yuval Noah Harari, Sapiens. Interestingly, I saw online the other day that Sapiens, the Korean audiobook version, is read by Jang Gi-ha. Jang Gi-ha is one of my favorite Korean musicians, and he reads the audiobook of that. I want to listen to it. But, Yuval Noah Harari talks about in Sapiens how there were many versions of sort of Sapiens. There were sort of 6, 7, there was the Homo sapiens, but there were many branches of us before, and one survived and led to the thing. When we talk about race, we're discussing our view on the sort of ontology and epistemology of human history and nature. Recorded civilization goes back to sort of 2500 BC or a little bit longer than that. But we know humans have been existing on this planet for much, 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 much longer than that. I don't know the answer to race or whether it's real or whether it's a social construct. I know there are very strong opinions on both sides of that argument. My point in mentioning race was that the idea that Korea is a single ethnic race is used for political means and for political purposes a lot of the time. And that might be good and that might be bad, but generally I don't think it's good to use race as a political weapon. It might unite the people, but it creates an enemy of those outside the race. And I feel that the Koreans perhaps are not as homogenous in that sense. Shin Jae-ho, when he created the idea of the Minjok, it was to take away the history from the courts and the kings, but he also wanted to take over Manchuria. He lamented the loss in Korean history of Manchuria, Shin Jae-ho. So the creation of Minjok and the propagation of that, I'm not sure about. In terms of whether race is real or not, there are arguments on both sides of that, and I'm sure people have very strong opinions on it.
Yeah, right. So I think that kind of answered the second last comment as well.
Okay. I can't see the comments here, so feel free to ask any if there are, but otherwise.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you that I assume like over the duration of the past couple of centuries and the domination that I guess white-faced people have had on the globe, there's a lot of resentment on the side of the people that were subjugated and dominated by the whites.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe this is why a lot of people of color. So Kyohan says that Koreans always stick together, and I have never seen African peoples, other Asians or other, not take their own side, while while white people don't necessarily stick together. And I could use that as an explanation, as perhaps there is a smidget of guilt amongst the white population and feeling kind of, to put it mildly, like crap over what happened over the past centuries, and people of color might be sticking together for that same reason. But so, like you said, I think taking either side on or propagating this idea of race, I think it just doesn't really help the cause. It doesn't make things better in any way, I don't think.
Let me just say this about it, if I can, please, Jack. That you say that white people did these things and the empire, the imperialism, and the subjugation of other peoples. Absolutely, history demonstrates that is true. But that wasn't all white people.
Right, true.
That wasn't all white people. And under that white rule, white people also suffered. I mean, not everybody lived as kings. Not everybody. I mean, go and read Dickens. Go and read Orwell. Go and read like what the working life of some white people down in coal, in mines, looking for coal, things like this, in factories with the start of the Industrial Revolution. Those white people didn't have a good life. It was a struggle for those white people to get individual rights, to get human rights, to be freed from slavery.
Sure.
And I will also say that it shouldn't also be assumed that just because the whites did, a certain group of white people did bad things, that any other group is then morally superior just because they're weak. I mean, Nietzsche talks about this, but the Koreans, just for example, with their Songbun system, the caste system here, the civil war and the massacre of communists and anti-communists and things like this, I don't think it necessarily comes down to the color of your skin, whether you're good or bad, or even your race. There are good and bad people in all races. There are good and bad people in all colors. And to always reduce things to a color, to a race, to a country, I think is very reductionist. And you could ask 100 Korean people, 100 British people, they'll have a different opinion on everything. So to umbrella term them like that is a little bit too simplistic for my liking.
Yeah, sure. And I guess you don't have to go too far back in history to even see something like Pol Pot's trying to eliminate half of the population, of its own people. So Anyway, okay. Well, we've hit the hour mark,
Mhm.
David. So I think we're gonna try and close up this gizmo because I'm pretty sure you've got stuff to do and you probably want to, get some Z's and your beauty rest as well. I would imagine. So um, I don't know. One last question. Surprise question. I don't know. The ancient Egyptians believed that you'd go in the afterlife, and in order to do that, their sarcophagi were stuffed with objects and talismans and whatnot that these deceased could take on their journey.
Mhm.
What's one thing that you would choose to take with you in your afterlife, in your Egyptian afterlife journey?
A photo of my family, and then second, a book, because I need something to read on my journey. It's a long journey, so if I could take a photo of my family, I don't know if that would fit, but and a book, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to say two things: a photo of my family and a book, and maybe "Welcome to Sky Valley" by Caius, so I have something to listen to
Nice.
on
You
the
could
wall.
probably slip in that photo as a bookmark, so that would probably be
Yeah,
excused
that would
as.
be. If I could just finish before I go, I
Yeah.
mean, you said that there are comments. I'm willing to discuss and answer any questions. If people have them, please feel free to reach out and contact me. I'm very available on Twitter, on social media, or via email. Also, every Wednesday from 6:30 till 7:30, I'll be hosting a show on TBS EFM 101.3 called Business Now. So you can hear more of my opinions there. And my band Tampa's Dusk, TAMPASDUSK. We've got a lot of concerts coming up. We might be playing with Dynamic Duo and the Dick Punks in Gwanghwamun for the Arirang Festival. So look out for that as well. However you want to get hold of me, for music, for arguments, or for anything else, please feel free to do so.
Nice. There you go. See, like I told you, David, man of many colors. His links, media links, are in the video below. If you have any questions for David, either leave them in the comment section or contact David directly. You can do either one. Azam Lok, thank you for commenting, and Kyohan, thank you for all your questions, very entertaining, very provocative. David, thank you very much for coming, agreeing to do this podcast and coming on the
Yeah.
chat. And all the best with all your future work, man. I look forward to reading a lot more of your stuff.
Thanks very much, Jack. I really enjoyed this, and the chat's been real. It's been nice. I really appreciated it. So, best of luck with what you do, and I hope to see you around soon. Maybe in Ulsan, maybe in Seoul, or maybe on the internet somewhere.
Yeah, I'll be actually in Seoul on Wednesday.
Excellent.
All right. Take care, David.
Thanks very much.
Okay, bye
Goodbye.
bye. Right, and here goes David. Um, Hope everybody enjoyed it. The show has come to an end. And what else is there to say? This was a fabulous interview. Once again, thank you, David, for showing up and agreeing to do this show. This was very good. Again, if you have any questions for David Tizzard, you can follow his social media links in the description below the video. If you have any questions, you can post them directly below the video or contact David, and I'm sure he'll answer to you because he seems like a dude that wants to engage in discourse. So that's good. Um, and in other news, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please make sure to hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this podcast. Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me? I hope you can. Yeah, okay, I'm good. So if you haven't subscribed to the podcast or to the channel, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Um, you can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Oh, that's strange, unusual, and weird. Can you hear me now? No? Can't hear. Okay. Okay. Well, let me do a quick little shift here. Okay. That should be okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, too many devices on the go apparently. So, if you, as I was saying, if you haven't subscribed yet, yes, okay, I can hear. Fantastic. Technical difficulties. Yeah, it's just switching between the devices and all the plugins and plugouts. Things just get misplaced. So, yeah, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please make sure to do so. Hit that subscribe button and hit the like button. It helps the channel. We've reached 519 subscribers. We still have a long way to go. Azm Lok is here. Azm and I have been following each other for a long time. Azm makes fantastic videos of miniature carvings. He's a very talented artist. And so if you're here and you're watching this, check out Azm's videos channel, because it's really cool. He makes things like he's done a lot of stuff, like he's been cooking mushroom soup and steak and all kinds of little stuff on miniature dishes that he himself created and cut out and shaped. It was really fantastic. Here comes 520. Thank you, Kyohan. Very nice. Thanks for the support. Much welcomed. Much appreciated. On Wednesday, I'll be releasing another video from our Thailand trip. The next little while, the videos will be about Thailand, because that's what we've done and there's a lot of content. But in the meantime, I will continue recording things about South Korea, because that's where I live, that's my passion. And I hope to build up a nice thick library of Korean video content that I can put onto autopilot later and have it uploaded on a regular basis. So okay, that's it for tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. Kyohan and Azm Lok, thanks a lot. And to everybody else there, have a fantastic Monday evening. Have a fantastic rest of the week. And I will see you on Wednesday. Or if not, on the next week's podcast. I have another fantastic guest, Russell. Oh, let me just get his last name quickly so I don't butcher it too much. Just waiting for it to load. And of course, technology is slow as always, yeah. Ain't not the case of, is not the way of the world. Russell K. Scott, right. Russell K. Scott is a motivational speaker. He's a motivational guru. He helps men, I guess, fathers or men in general, to reshape their life and build up. He helps people become better than they are at the present time. So I'm going to talk to him. He's got a very interesting story that I think he's going to want to share with us, because I have seen him share it on other social media platforms, and so I believe that's going to be also a very interesting talk. So come back next week, and if not, then I'll see you on Wednesday. Have a good night. Again, thank you for tuning in. Take care. Bye-bye.